Hello and welcome back to the False Foundation. I'm Jim. Thanks for listening. In our first two episodes, we laid out the content of the America Praise Initiative pamphlet, showing how it explicitly calls for a national rededication to a very specific, exclusionary, faith-based vision of America during the celebration of America's 250th anniversary. This movement, like many others, is built on a narrative, a carefully constructed story designed to change how you, the citizen, think and act. The question is, how is that story being delivered? How do you convince an entire population that a problem exists and that prayer is a relevant and acceptable political solution? The answer is a concept military and intelligence analysts call cognitive warfare. So let's start with the basics. What is cognitive warfare? It's often lumped in with information warfare or psychological operations or psyops, but it's fundamentally different and far more dangerous in the 21st century. Simply put, cognitive warfare targets the human mind as the battlefield. Information warfare is about controlling what you see, the data, the facts, the news stories. PsyOps is controlling about what you feel, using emotion to provoke a reaction. But cognitive warfare goes deeper, encompassing IW and PsyOps. It aims to control how you think. It exploits your mental biases, your inherent shortcuts in processing information, to alter your fundamental perceptions of reality, your beliefs, and ultimately your decisions. It's the strategic effort to erode your rationality, to degrade your ability to discern fact from fiction, and to make you more susceptible to manipulation. It's not just about spreading a lie, it's about making you incapable of recognizing truth as a reliable concept. In this episode, we're going to stop thinking about this only as an international threat from states like Russia or China and start applying this critical framework right here at home. We'll examine the specific tactics the religious right employs, tactics of certainty, fear, and polarization, to wage a continuous, silent war for the American mind, turning faith itself into a weapon of mass influence and redefining what it means to be an American. Let's dive in. To truly grasp the sophistication of the cognitive warfare being waged here at home, we need to understand its evolution on the global stage. While the use of propaganda and psyops dates back to ancient times, the digital age has given rise to a new highly scalable weapon, the troll farm. The most infamous example is the Russian government-linked Internet Research Agency, the now notorious troll farm based in St. Petersburg. Their operations provide a clear, secular model of cognitive warfare that is surprisingly similar to the goals of Christian nationalism. These troll farms don't simply promote pro-Russian talking points. They insert themselves into existing social divisions with an adversary country like the United States. Their tactic isn't to convert a liberal into a conservative or vice versa. Their goal is to inject extreme, polarizing rhetoric into every debate, creating an illusion of deep, unbridgeable division. They do this by establishing thousands of fake accounts that look like real Americans. They create pages dedicated to everything from Black Matters to extreme far-right patriotism, often simultaneously. They use social media algorithms, the very mechanisms designed to feed you content that triggers an emotional reaction, to spread their most incendiary messages to the most receptive audiences. In short, they are masters of weaponizing emotion and sowing discord. They try to amplify anger, frustration, and tribalism, making it nearly impossible for everyday citizens, even those who agree on most things, to find common ground. But why? Why would a foreign adversary spend enormous resources just to make Americans argue on Facebook? The ultimate goal of this external cognitive warfare is political paralysis and systemic weakening. Russia doesn't care about the details of U.S. property tax policy or school board debates. They want the entire political system to become so polarized and distrustful that it's incapable of functioning. They want voters to become so exhausted by contradiction and anger that they either throw up their hands and check out or retreat to their ideological extremes where consensus is impossible. By eroding faith in our shared institutions, in media, in science, in government, and even in the electoral process, they undermine our national resilience. Now hold that thought. The goal of foreign cognitive warfare is to weaken a nation by fragmenting its social reality and destroying institutional trust. In our next segment, We'll see how the religious right is utilizing the same tactics with the same goal, not for the benefit of a foreign power, but to establish their own highly specific domestic authority. Evidence versus authority. The goal of cognitive warfare is to capture and control the human mind. To understand how the religious right is so effective at this, we have to look at the single most crucial vulnerability in human cognition: how we decide what is true. In the secular, scientific, and humanist tradition, the tradition I personally value, we seek truth through evidence. We value research, curiosity, and falsifiability. If I have a hypothesis, I have to test it, and I must be ready for the evidence to prove me wrong. This process demands a degree of mental humility and a comfort with ambiguity or uncertainty. But the religious right and fundamentalist groups in general exploit an older, more primal cognitive drive: the reliance on authority. Think of it this way: their system is not built on what does the data show, but on what does the authority tell us. This is where their use of cognitive warfare begins to crystallize. They utilize a powerful technique known as narrative control to undermine evidence and elevate the source of authority. They do this in three critical ways. 1. The elevation of absolute authority. The first step is to establish an unassailable source of truth. It's not just that the Bible contains truth, it's that it's presented as the only source of absolute, divine, and unchallengeable authority. Once a person accepts this premise, any evidence of a secular source, a scientist, a journalist, a history book, even a personal experience, can be instantly dismissed if it contradicts the official narrative. Their cognitive bias is now weaponized. Confirmation bias dictates they only accept information that confirms the authority they have already chosen. 2. Weaponizing the leader. Building on this, the authority is then personified. Whether it's a specific pastor, a movement leader, or a political figure aligned with their faith, this person becomes the interpreter of the absolute authority. This creates a psychological dependency. When the leader speaks, it's not just a person's opinion. It's framed as an extension of the divine will. The audience is effectively trained to practice reflexive control on themselves. They instantly adjust their perception and behavior to match the directive of the trusted authority, bypassing their own critical judgment. 3. Undermining secular institutions. To protect this structure, the religious right must constantly attack any competing source of evidence and authority. Look at their rhetoric. They repeatedly target universities, mainstream media, and government scientists. These institutions are not just wrong, they are portrayed as wicked, corrupt, or secular humanists who are deliberately trying to mislead or hurt the faithful. This is a classic cognitive warfare tactic, diluting the truth by creating enough distrust in outside sources that the only safe place to seek truth is back inside the church, under the authority of the leader. This is all supported, of course, by the persecution complex of many Christian fundamentalists. This is the heart of the false foundation. The movement convinces people that true ethical integrity lies not in an honest, evidence-based inquiry, but in the unwavering obedience to an established religious authority. And once that foundation is set, they can leverage fear, anxiety, and political narratives like the ones found in the America Praise Initiative to direct the thoughts and actions of millions. Dehumanization and separate realities. So we established that cognitive warfare's primary goal is to shift a person's source of truth from evidence to authority. Once that shift is complete, the door opens for the most ethically corrosive tactic of cognitive warfare: dehumanization. The religious right is highly skilled at leveraging the us versus them dichotomy, but they take it far beyond simple political disagreement. They use a spiritualized form of cognitive warfare that reframes their opposition not just as wrong, but as evil. When a political or ideological opponent is labeled a secular humanist, a heathen, or most powerfully, an agent of Satan or a demon, they cease to be a fellow citizen with a different opinion. They become a spiritual threat. This is a profoundly effective cognitive warfare tactic because it completely shuts down the need for empathy or negotiation. You don't negotiate with a demon, you cast it out. You don't compromise with the agent of Satan, you defeat them. This framing instantly justifies any extreme action taken against the person or group, whether it's shunning them, passing discriminatory laws, or, as we discussed in our earlier episodes, pressuring non-believers into compliance. This takes the in-group, out-group bias, the basic human tendency to favor your own group, and supercharges it with divine authority, making the hostility a moral imperative. This demonization process leads directly to the most destructive outcome of modern cognitive warfare, the creation of fundamentally different, non-overlapping realities. For those operating under the influence of this cognitive warfare, the secular world, the one based on science, shared institutions, and observable data, is viewed as a clever demonic deception. They are taught that the real truth is only accessible through the lens of their specific religious authority. What this means in practice is that we stop living in the same world. If I see a scientific report on climate change, I see the data and evidence. If someone influenced by this cognitive warfare sees the same report, they see a lie fabricated by an ungodly institution to manipulate policy. We are no longer debating the facts, we are debating the nature of reality itself. This is why it becomes so difficult to have a civil or productive conversation. We are arguing from two entirely separate foundations. When one group believes its narrative is divinely inspired, and the other group is literally doing the devil's work, shared reality is lost. I recall my own experience in basic training. My choice to not attend services wasn't just a matter of preference. It was an ethical stand that isolated me, ensuring that I would not be in the room with those who held views that I could not support. The pressure to conform, to put a mask of belief, to avoid cleaning toilets, that was the subtle psychological force of this us versus them environment at work. This religious brand of cognitive warfare ensures the separation remains permanent. It establishes a false foundation of shared belief, then uses spiritualized paranoia to keep the walls between groups high and fortified. So we've discussed how cognitive warfare operates by separating us into non-overlapping realities, demonizing the opposition, and elevating absolute authority. Now let's bring this back to the America Praise Initiative, the literal pamphlet that laid the foundation for this whole discussion. The most potent way to establish a new reality is to simply revise the old one. The America Praise Initiative is presented as a patriotic movement to rededicate the nation as we approach the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. But what it really is a calculated historical warfare operation. As we detailed in the first two episodes, the core resources of this initiative include a document of prayers and proclamations throughout American history. This document is not a neutral history text. It's a weapon of cognitive warfare. It cherry picks and distorts events to establish a false historical foundation, the idea that the United States was, is, and must always be a specifically Christian nation. Consider how they treat the Founding Fathers and the founding documents. The pamphlet and its related resources lean heavily on stories like George Washington supposedly kneeling in prayer at Valley Forge, a story often cited, but which lacks credible historical evidence. It includes debunked claims like the assertion that Washington added the phrase, "So help me God," to the presidential oath, a phrase absent from the Constitution. Most egregiously, they attempt to Christianize the most fundamental secular political act in our nation's history, the creation of the Constitution. The America Praise resources dishonestly imply that the Constitutional Convention, the body that adopted our entirely secular governing document, was infused with official prayer. This conflates private religious acts with the public legal process of statecraft. And what does this historical revisionism choose to omit? The clear and robust secularist views of the two most critical thinkers in the founding period, James Madison, the primary architect of the Constitution, and Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and the man who demanded the separation of church and state be enshrined in the Bill of Rights. By eliminating the secular voices and fabricating a continuous Christian narrative, the religious right achieves its cognitive warfare objective. It makes its modern political aims appear to be a restoration of a lost, divinely ordained America, rather than a radical, exclusionary departure from our secular foundation. This is the ultimate danger of cognitive warfare. When you control the past, you control the present. And when you can convince people that a shared evidence-based history is a lie, you have won the war for their mind. The final and perhaps most insidious layer of this cognitive warfare is what it does to the minds of the people being influenced. Once the false foundation of authority is established, the movement can operate with shocking levels of obscurantism, deliberately blocking clarity and critical thought, forcing its followers to harbor wildly contradictory beliefs. This is the weapon of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance at its core is the mental stress or discomfort a person feels when holding two or more conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes simultaneously. For the religious right, this isn't an accident, it's a feature. The more dissonance a system forces on its adherents, the more desperately they will cling to the authority to resolve that stress. Contradiction 1, the pro-life, pro-death dissonance. The most glaring example of this juxtaposition of pro-life advocacy with a staunch defense of the death penalty. The moral rhetoric of the pro-life movement is centered on the absolute sacred and divinely mandated value of human life from conception. Yet, the same political bloc that champions this absolute value will simultaneously and often enthusiastically support the state's right to end the life of a convicted adult. How is this resolved in the mind? The cognitive warfare framework provides the answer. The divine value of the fetus is maintained by the authority of the church, but the value of the convicted criminal is revoked by the same authority who declares the criminal to be one of the demons or agents of evil we discussed earlier. The only way to live with this contradiction is to stop questioning the premise and simply accept that the authority's definition of who deserves to live is the ultimate truth. Contradiction 2, parental rights versus state-mandated faith. Another potent source of dissonance involves the rallying cry for, quote, parental rights. The movement argues for the absolute right of parents to control their children's education and moral instruction, fiercely opposing any perceived government interference in the home. Yet, many of these same groups have no problem forcing a state-mandated religion upon every child in a public school by demanding the 10 Commandments be posted in every classroom. If your deepest value is parental freedom from government indoctrination, how can you simultaneously champion a law that uses state power to indoctrinate children with your specific religious text? The cognitive reconciliation is achieved by defining parental rights as belonging only to those parents who conform to the religious rights narrative. Any secular or dissenting parent is dismissed as part of the secular humanist outgroup, and their rights are irrelevant. The dissonance is neutralized by dehumanizing the opposition. Contradiction 3, small government versus theocracy. Here's a third, equally powerful conflict, the tension between the passionate political demand for small government and a fervent desire for a Christian theocracy. Many figures in this movement present themselves as champions of limited government, fiscal conservatism, and a reduction of state power. Yet, their policy goals require an unprecedented expansion of state power into personal, private, and moral life, from regulating women's healthcare decisions to codifying specific religious practices into law. Their ultimate goal is to use massive power of the federal government to enforce their religious and moral vision. The cognitive warfare is designed to make the follower ignore this contradiction. They believe they are fighting for freedom, even as they champion massive state control, because the authority has taught them that their control is righteous freedom and anything else is oppression. These contradictions, fueled by obscurantism, keep the follower in a constant state of mental tension, which ironically makes them more dependent on the authoritative figures of the religious right to tell them what to believe and what to oppose. This is the perfect self-sustaining loop of cognitive warfare. We've covered a lot of ground today. We defined cognitive warfare as the battle for your mind, saw how foreign adversaries like the Russian troll farms use it to sow chaos, and then exposed how the domestic religious right applies the same playbook by swapping evidence for authority, by dehumanizing the opposition, by fabricating a false history, and by leveraging cognitive dissonance to maintain control over its adherents. In the last episode, I promised to bring you one of the most powerful counterarguments to the Christian nation narrative, and it's found in a foundational document signed by President John Adams. I'm talking about the Treaty of Tripoli. Signed in 1797, this treaty with the Barbary states was unanimously ratified by the U.S. Senate and officially proclaimed by President Adams. And it contains one of the most explicit statements on the secular nature of the U.S. government ever put to paper. Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli states, and I quote, as the government of the United States of America is not, in any sense, founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of the Mussulman, and as the said states never entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries. End quote. That's it. Clear, unequivocal language agreed to by our early government. The United States is, quote, not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, end quote. This is the historical evidence-based reality that the cognitive warfare of the religious right is specifically designed to eliminate from your mind. Their aim is to replace this inconvenient secular truth with the comfortable, authoritative certainty of their false foundation. The defense against this cognitive war is not to argue scripture or theology. It's to cultivate cognitive resilience. It's the ability to pause, to weigh evidence over authority, and to embrace the ethical integrity of curiosity and rational deliberation, the same values that would have justified attending a service dedicated to secular humanism and scientific research. The moment you recognize that you are being asked to hold two contradictory beliefs, to demand small government while seeking a theocracy, or to cherish life while advocating execution, that dissonance is a signal. It's a sign that the cognitive warfare is working. That is your moment to choose evidence over authority. Thank you for joining me on The False Foundation. If you have thoughts, feedback, or examples of cognitive dissonance that you've observed in this movement, I want to hear from you. You can reach out directly via email at jim@falsefoundation.com. Join us next time as we continue to expose the systems and narratives that threaten the secular, pluralistic society we are ethically bound to protect.